Hey everyone, and welcome back to another podcast. My name is John, your host, and today I'm joined by my brother Leo Venus, who is a medical student graduating very soon. You guys already know if you've watched the last two podcasts that we did together. We decided to sit down right before he heads back to Dublin and do another podcast for you guys. So, what are we talking about today, Leo?
Yeah, so I think we're going to talk about the science, whether or not the science supports veganism. Because, to be honest, the last two episodes we did was a lot of fun, but, it was a lot of talking about my personal experiences in medical school, why doctors don't know a lot about nutrition, as well as the carnivore diet, which, is a fad based on conspiracy theories and hypotheticals. So I thought we might as well talk about the facts today rather than all of these hypotheticals and all these theories and actually talk about what the science says.
Wow, yeah, starting off the podcast by triggering a lot of carnivores. I mean, yeah, that's a way to go about it for sure. let's keep it cool from now on.
If the truth triggers you, then that's meant to be.
Okay, so exactly. I mean, I think this is really interesting because today we're living in a world where there is a lot of confusion, and it seems like we're not getting closer and closer towards a consensus or a truth. We're kind of being pulled in many more new directions in terms of dietary choice. So many new ways of eating, new trends, new diets, and people are more confused than ever, it seems, even though there haven't existed a time in the history of the world where there's been this much research done in terms of nutrition. So yeah, let's dive into this. Let's see what the science is actually saying. Is the science supporting a vegan diet, or is the science saying that we have to be cautious and that the vegan diet is deficient and dangerous? So it's really important before we get into it, I think, just to establish what a plant-based diet is, right? Because obviously it's a very broad and general term. A plant-based diet can mean anything, right? So when we're talking here, we're obviously talking about a balanced, whole food based, mostly whole food based, plant-based diet, not a raw vegan diet, not a fruitarian diet, not a junk food vegan diet. We're just talking about, a plant-based diet that is balanced and has adequate amounts of protein, fats, and carbs, as well as all the micronutrients, that you need to do. Obviously, it's hard to plan your diet if you've never done it before to, optimize for health. But we're just going to take that diet as an example when we're talking about, what the research is saying, because, there's so many different ways to do a plant-based diet that it's kind of confusing for people to know. Is this research, on vegans based on people who are eating a whole food diet, or is it based on someone who just calls himself a vegan for ethical reasons but is eating a veggie grill every single day? So First, my question to you is: how do we know what people are actually eating when these studies on vegans are being made?
Yeah, so I mean that's a great question. It depends on the study. If it's a cohort study, an epidemiological study going over 10, 20, 30 years, then it's usually based on questionnaires where people report what they're eating on. It depends. The interval of time depends on the study. Some studies will recheck their diets every month. Some studies will do it every 3 months. So it all depends on the study. But then you also have randomized controlled trials, which have actually been done for a few things in vegan diets or in plant-based diets, where you actually control for everything. You actually see what they're eating the whole day. So there are no variables that you're missing out on there.
Mm-hmm. So the randomized controlled trials are basically a very high-powered form of studying nutrition, right? It's because it's such a controlled environment. You're accounting for so many things that things like epidemiology and questionnaires can't really cover, right? Is that the kind of like gist of it?
Well, it's more of the safety of not misreporting anything,
right?
Because you actually have full control over the environment. In randomized controlled trials, the participants are in the center,
right?
And they're physically there.
And people are observing them, right? Yeah. As opposed to the questionnaires, we're relying on memory and people's own telling the truth and reporting. Yeah, exactly. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and the thing about randomized controlled trials is it's the gold standard for pharmaceuticals and pharmaceutical therapy, medical treatments. All drugs have to go through randomized controlled trials, and they're very, very good for that. The only thing about in nutrition is, though it has a lot of accuracy and it does remove a lot of variables that you want to control for, the thing about randomized control trials is they're usually quite short term because of the expenses. You can imagine if you have all these participants coming into a center to be observed and to have all the variables be measured, then if you're going to do that over a long time, and when we're talking about nutrition, we're talking about the long-term health. So a lot of these health outcomes will only be seen after decades of being on a diet, right? So randomized control trials are not practical for those sort of issues, but we do have randomized control trials for things like diabetes, hypertension, things like that, where we have clearly shown benefits to being on a plant-based diet.
That's not true, Leo. Where's the proof? Have you ever seen that? Have you ever been to a clinic where they do randomized controlled trials on vegans?
Actually,
that doesn't exist.
Yes, I have actually. I was on an internship last summer in the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine and the Barnard Medical Center, which is a nonprofit organization. They have their own medical center with 2 plant-based doctors. They have nutritionists. They have nurse practitioners. They all have a overarching theme of plant-based living and healthy lifestyle. So it's a normal primary care. Well, it's not normal, but they do the normal work of primary care physicians, where people come in with regular medical problems. They can take them on medications, take them off medications, adjust their medications just like any other primary setting. But then, like I said, they have their overarching theme of plant-based nutrition, which they kind of, recommend to everyone coming in, whether they be vegan or not. And a lot of people I saw coming in were not vegan, had no idea what it was to eat plant-based. And they started going on this diet thanks to these doctors and these nutritionists or dietitians and the nurse practitioners that work there. And you'd see them coming in every couple months. You'd see their blood pressure coming down. You see their cholesterol levels coming down, their HbA1c, which is a measure for long-term blood glucose control. All of this is coming down, and they're feeling better. They're losing weight. And it was just a really nice experience to see people in real life rather than just knowing about the theory. But actually, like I said, that's the medical center, but they also have the experimental, the research side of things, where they actually do a lot of randomized control trials. They've done some on diabetes, they've done some on hypertension, rheumatoid arthritis, they've done some on menstrual bleeding, and I think they even did one on PCOS. But the important thing is that they do a lot of randomized control trials, and they have produced a lot of research. And this is just one facility, one organization. There's a lot of good research out there supporting the plant-based diet. And that is what we want to talk about today, is the actual research, what is actually being said from the scientific, the high-quality science out there, rather than people who claim to be scientists and just give you their opinions and theories. Because there is a lot of theories out there, and there's so much information out there. And like you said, it's so difficult for people to know what to do because we've never had more information, but we've also never had more misinformation.
Yeah, that's really well put. And I would like to just jump right into it. So what are the main areas that a plant-based diet has been proven or, shown to reverse certain conditions or help with certain conditions? What are the main areas that are being, shown to be the most beneficial right now with the studies and research?
Yeah, so this is what I always love to talk about, because as doctors, I'm in medical school, doctors cannot give advice to patients if it's not backed by science. So these 4 areas that I'm going to talk about now are the 4 areas where we have so much research, whether it be epidemiological, with randomized controlled trials, with case controls, whatever type of studies you're talking about. There's so much data, there's so much scientific knowledge supporting this, that we know for a fact that in these 4 areas, plant-based diets have been shown to outperform any other diet studied so far in terms of preventing, but even helping to reverse and treat some of these diseases. So number 1, which is the most important one, is cardiovascular disease. There's no doubt that the plant-based diet outperforms any other diet studied so far in preventing and helping to reverse cardiovascular disease. And this is so important because cardiovascular disease is our number 1 killer. It kills over 17 million people every single year. And, over half of people actually have it or have symptoms of it. So it's a huge, huge disease burden. And, a lot of people say that if this was the only thing that plant-based diets could do, all doctors should be recommending it. And I think that's a very valid statement, assuming that it doesn't have any other big dangers to it. But we'll talk about that later. Area number 2, type 2 diabetes. So plant-based diets have been shown to outperform any other diet in terms of preventing type 2 diabetes. And this is one of the biggest misconceptions people have, is that eating sugar, eating high carb diets is going to increase your risk of type 2 diabetes, where it's the opposite. The people who eat the most carbohydrate rich diets have the lowest risks of type 2 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes is a big deal. It not only shortens your lifespan, but it vastly reduces your quality of life while you're living as well. So definitely not a good thing.
Yeah, we're not promoting eating sugar though. Like, like Leo says, he said sugar and then carbohydrates. And, people think about sugars as in, desserts and sweets and processed sugar and table sugar syrups and that kind of stuff. So we're talking carbohydrates, right? Like,
exactly.
People eating even fruits and that kind of stuff.
Fruits, potatoes, turnips, all these kinds of things are naturally high in carbohydrates or natural sugars.
Yeah.
But sugars from that and, sweets and cakes and stuff is a completely different thing. And not only that, but sweets and cakes, a lot of people forget they're also high fat. They're not just high sugar, exactly. They're also very, very high fat.
Yeah.
And that's the worst thing when you're combining high sugar and high fat. You're setting yourself up for disaster. Mm-hmm. But, sugar and carbohydrates is a very, very misunderstood concept in general in the world. And we could talk for ages just about sugar and carbohydrates. But for the purposes of this, let's move on to topic number 3, or the point number 3, where the research is so strong that we can confidently, as doctors, as evidence-based practitioners, recommend the plant-based diet, and that is hypertension or high blood pressure, which again has become so normal in society that you almost expect anyone over 60 to be at least on one blood pressure medication. It's almost become normal. Mm-hmm. A lot of people, if you go to the doctor and you're a little bit, over 50, 60, and you're not on a blood pressure medication, they're going to be very, very surprised because it's just become the norm.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it's become the norm. If you're not on medications by that age, it's strange for doctors, which is, again, just kind of shows you what the dynamic is today in society.
It's a crazy world.
Something is wrong, right?
Yeah.
And then number 4 is for certain cancers. So plant-based diets have been shown to outperform every other diet studied for the prevention of breast, prostate, and colorectal cancer, which are 3 of the 4 top killing cancers, actually. Mm-hmm. The number 1 is lung cancer, which obviously is associated with smoking, which, by the way, was proven by epidemiology, not randomized controlled trials. But yes, so those 3 cancers are vastly lower risk. And again, you can help. Treatment outcomes have been better on people with people who are on plant-based diets. So if we were going to think of, these are the 4 areas where we have the most information, right? This is where we're extremely sure because there's so much research, so much science supporting this. But there's probably a ton of other places where a healthy whole food plant-based diet is superior and will be shown to be so as more research comes in. I'm very confident about it. But as a evidence-based, scientist, all we can say for sure is these 4 areas. But think about it. These 4 areas, if you're going to put all these 4 together, you're probably talking about half of, disease mortality in the world. If you're talking type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, breast, prostate, and colorectal cancer, and high blood pressure, that's already a huge, huge chunk of the disease burden of society today. Mm-hmm. And this is proven. If you go to the biggest organization of nutrition in the world, such as the Academy of Nutrition Dietetics, the British Nutrition Foundation, the Dietitians of Canada, they all agree. They have reports. They're all saying that plant-based diets have benefits for cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and certain cancers. So this is factual information. This is not just my opinion or my theory on what's going on. This is what's been, set in stone by the scientific community.
But the scientific community are just a bunch of vegetarians and vegans, just like, spewing propaganda. How can you trust these people?
Well, that's, if you think like that, you can't believe in anything. Obviously, that's the conspiracy.
We covered this in the last episode.
Exactly.
But like Leo was saying, people can easily just say, oh, wow, the plant-based diet, okay, it proves 4 areas, you said heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, and what was the last one again? A couple cancers?
Yeah, breast, prostate, colorectal
Yeah,
cancer.
Exactly. So, okay, the plant-based diet has been proven to fix 4 areas. What about the million other areas? Like, what about those? That means that, the plant-based diet might be suboptimal for other, kind of conditions and diseases. What do you have to say about that?
Well, then you're basically putting on the scale on one side, you're putting the weight of cardiovascular disease, breast, prostate, colorectal cancer, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, which kills so many people.
Right.
And on the other side of the scale, you're putting hypotheticals. What ifs? What if the vegan diet is not so good for this? What if that? And by the way, this is also not the case, because we have enough information to say that the vegan diet is at the very, very least safe for the majority of people, at the very least. And that's, again, like I said before, the biggest organizations of nutritional professionals in the world have officially stated that plant-based diets can be adequate for all stages of life, for all people, whether it be pregnancy, infancy, breastfeeding, elderly, athletes, you name it. So we know, unless you have there's a misconception out there that I think it comes from all this, we're so special, we're so unique, we're so genetically different, the blood type diet, all this kind of stuff, where it's like everyone is so different. But no, for the vast majority of people, a plant-based diet will work. And sure, there are some rare cases, like I read a case, for example, of a guy who had a genetic abnormality where he lacked the enzymes and the proteins required for producing carnitine and transporting carnitine around his cells.
Right.
And so when he went on a vegetarian diet, he got extremely ill very, very fast. And so they supplemented carnitine and he was completely fine. So yes, there are certain rare genetic conditions where perhaps going vegan will make you feel really bad really quickly and actually get very, very sick. But for the vast majority of people, this is not the case. So
and I do want to just add to the point. I think a lot of people do experience some side effects, some bloating, some gas, some digestive issues when trying the plant-based diet. But you have to remember that you've been eating for a certain way for 20-something years. Maybe very, very low in fiber, very, low in plant matter, right? So when you all of a sudden switch to a whole food plant-based diet, of course, there's going to be some discomfort because your body is just not used to it. And that's just how it is. Like your gut microbiome has to adjust to the new foods that you're taking in. And that can take a lot of time. And apparently it's very individual based on different people, how long it takes for your body to adapt to the increased amount of fiber and plant matter that you are putting into your system. So it's a lot of people just jump into it and feel bad immediately and just conclude that it's not for them. But then again, we see all this research saying that it's so beneficial for diabetes, cancer, heart disease. And people are confused. Why is it not working for me when so many people are reversing heart disease with it? Like, what am I doing wrong? And that's the thing. People are just jumping from one extreme diet to the next. And I believe that the way to do it is just to incrementally switch your diet around so that you're incorporating more and more plants gradually, especially if you're someone who has never been a very big fiber and plant eater. That's definitely the way to go, in my opinion. And just not switching everything, just like replacing the meat, dairy, and eggs with some substitutes that will be, similar in calories and macronutrient amounts. That could be an easy transition point, and then just gradually increase the amount of whole foods that you're adding into your system. And that way, you'll avoid all the complications and problems of feeling discomfort in terms of digestion when switching from a standard American diet to a whole food plant-based diet.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And like you said, the whole thing about experiences and how you're feeling, right? A lot of times when you're detoxing off something, when you're going off a lifestyle that is actually very unhealthy, you're going to feel bad. There's a lot of things that are bad for you that when you stop doing them, you're going to feel terrible, right? Whether it be drugs, alcohol, unhealthy foods, unhealthy habits, addictions, gaming, whatever it is, there's a lot of things that when you stop doing it, you're going to feel a lot worse. So that feeling of, oh, I feel bad, I have to go back to it, is not a very reliable way of determining whether or not something is healthy. And the other thing is that misconception that I got a lot of comments the other time where we were talking about the vegan diet, and I'm sure we'll get more comments on this one as well, where it's like, how dare you say the one diet suits everyone, that one diet is going to be good for all, right? But we mentioned this before, there's a million of different ways to do a vegan diet. So sure, I do not believe there is one vegan diet that suits everyone, like every person in the world, but I do think that for every person in the world there is one vegan diet that will suit them.
Yeah.
Whether it's and if you have one of these rare diseases or conditions that we talked about earlier, then maybe you'll have to have a couple of extra supplements. But it's not very difficult. It's and going back to the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, where I did my internship, I learned so much from them that summer, and they do exactly this that you were mentioning. You don't just go from living your entire life on meat and eggs and dairy and cheese, and then boom, whole foods plant-based, go. No, what they do is okay, let's do 1 week. Every day you try out a new vegan breakfast or whole food plant-based. Like, I don't like saying vegan because vegan can be junk food. It can be very unhealthy. But let's try a whole foods plant-based breakfast. Every day you try a different breakfast for 1 week. Lunch, dinner, you eat whatever you usually eat. Okay, that week is over now. Next week we're going to do lunches. So try a new whole foods plant-based lunch every day for a week. Eat whatever you want the rest of the day. Okay. Third week, we're going to do dinners. So people are then trying out different recipes and they're finding out the things that they like, the things that their palate can enjoy while they're going through this switch. And after these 3 weeks, then people are like, okay, I already know what I don't like. I know what I like. And so when they do make the switch, it's so much easier for them to at least have that base of being like, I know what I can eat and what I can't eat and what I enjoy eating. And then you can obviously still grow, still learn new recipes, still play around and experiment with other things. But at least it's not this whole big, daunting, challenging, menacing thing that you're jumping into and you have no idea what's going on. So I think that's probably for most people, the most helpful way of doing it. If you're not very experienced in plant-based cooking and stuff like that, is just so that you're not so overwhelmed. But obviously, if you can go overnight and you can live with just experimenting with everything every single day, that's fine. But for most people, that might be a problem. And if the consequence is that people feel overwhelmed and then give up on this diet that has such a huge potential to help their long-term health, and we're just talking about health now, but it has so many positive effects, and people are going to drop out of it because they're overwhelmed and they can't do it straight away, then of course it's much better to take it step by step and gradually, ease your way into the lifestyle.
Yeah. So what other areas would you like to see more research being done for the plant-based diet? I mean, I would personally be very interested in things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis and that kind of stuff. Just more of these autoimmune diseases. I would love to see more randomized control trials for these kinds of conditions. I don't know if the reason for them not being done yet is because it's not enough people with the condition, or if the scientific consensus is that the diet that a person eats will not affect those conditions, or I'm not sure like what the reason is. But what would you say are the main areas that we should focus on in terms of studying to convince more people to at least give this plant-based diet a chance? Because a lot of people, we mentioned those four main groups, but there are many other groups and types of illnesses and diseases that people might have, and we didn't touch on. So what other diseases might there be some upside to adopting a plant-based diet with?
Well, there's a lot of interesting points that we could touch on there. The first thing I would say is that I don't think we need more research at all to actually recommend the plant-based diet for everyone, because a lot of people have this conception or misconception that, the vegan diet is so new, it's only been around for a little while, the research is very new, it's very unsure. No, we actually have a ton of research that really shows the benefits and shows that it is safe for everyone. So we don't really need more research. But of course, I do want more research because, like I said, a lot of more benefits that we still aren't 100% sure about are probably going to come up the more we research the nutritional property or the effects of plant-based nutrition on people's health. And some of the more interesting areas would be, like you said, autoimmune diseases, which we know so little about them. And for sure, there's a lot of people who have been able to turn their lives around once they switch their diet from an unhealthy, processed, inflammatory, pro-inflammatory diet to an anti-inflammatory, healthy, whole food, plant-based diet. And these diseases can be so terrible. They can absolutely ruin a person's quality of life. And Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, all these kinds of diseases. There's so many things in medicine. That's one of the things I've learned. So many things in medicine that we know so little about. And we're giving treatments to try to control the symptoms as much as possible. We're not reversing the disease. We're not preventing the disease. And there's so much we don't know. So absolutely, I would love more research. But in the end of the day, the thing about a whole foods plant-based diet is the very worst thing that can happen, whether or not there is a lot of research backing your specific condition. If you're someone who's watching this and you have a disease and you have a problem, and the doctors have told you there's no treatment for it, there's nothing more we can do for you, then the worst case scenario for you, if you do try a whole foods plant-based diet, is that it doesn't cure your disease, but it improves your health overall. you might lose some weight, you might lower your blood pressure, you might feel a bit better, you might be healthier in general, but it might not reverse your specific condition. So that's the worst case scenario.
I think the worst case scenario would be the catastrophic bowel movements. Possibly.
Well, that is definitely something that can happen in the beginning for sure. And again,
it's not a big deal though.
It is a big deal when you're for some people, let's say, but it doesn't really, like, the important thing is, if that is the case for you, then you can adjust by maybe easing your way into it and slowly increasing, obviously, like we were talking about before. And there are things you can do for that as well. To be honest, you hear a lot about the bowel issues. For most people who go on a plant-based diet, their bowel health actually improves dramatically. This is one of the things where we live in a society where it's basically normal is very often dangerous to assume good, right? Cholesterol levels, if you're saying, I have normal cholesterol levels, when you live in a society where it is normal to have heart disease, where, the majority of people, when they're a bit up in the years, will have evidence of atherosclerosis in their arteries. They will have heart disease, whether or not it's asymptomatic or if they have symptoms like heart attacks, which sometimes can be the first symptom, right? So that's again why it's very dangerous to have experiences as like, I feel good. There are so many diseases that are asymptomatic, where you actually don't feel anything. You have no idea you have it. So again, I just wanted to re-emphasize this, that going off of purely experiences is not the best idea for sure. I forgot what we were talking about just now before, though. What we were saying.
I have no idea, man. But I was just looking at the clock, and I think that we should wrap this up so this doesn't become a very, very long podcast.
I would just say one more thing, though, because this is obviously the health aspect, which I think is very, very important. And for a lot of people, this is the last line of defense when talking about plant-based diets and veganism, because when you're looking at the environmental aspects and the ethical aspects, there's just no justifications, unless it were true that it was very dangerous for our health. However, like I said, the best science out there, the biggest, most trusted organizations, the compilations of all the research suggests that not only is it not dangerous, but it's better for us. Now, if we're going to look at the environmental aspects in terms of land use and water use and oil use and carbon dioxide equivalents and the ethics, there's absolutely no arguing it. So again, the plant-based diet has so many benefits overall that I think this kind of fear around health is basically what's holding us back. And that's why I think we really need to just show people and showcase how actually there is not a lot of controversy. There's a lot of controversy on the media, and there's a lot of controversy in society in general because of all these opinions being thrown around. But the science is actually not very controversial at all. It's actually very clear.
Yeah, and what I always say to people is to get rid of the all or nothing mindset, right? You don't need to go 100% plant-based straight away, right? You can go 90%, 95%. And if you want to stay that way, that's fine too. It's much better to be 95% vegan or 90% vegan than, eating a standard American diet. So we know for a fact that, the more plant-based we go, or we don't know for a fact, but we have a lot of evidence suggesting that the more plant-based a person lives, the better the health outcomes. And that is the most important thing. Whether you're 90, 95, 100%, in terms of health outcomes, you're probably doing a good job. So
I think, that's a very good point, because like you said, that's the kind of pattern that we see, is that the more plant-based you go, the better. We don't know 100% what is best, but even last month there was a published a study looking at some of the biggest populations of vegetarians and vegans around the world, the Adventists, and they were looking at very low intakes of meat. So I think the highest intake of meat in that study was I think it was one small portion a day of meat,
right?
And the smallest was probably one small portion a week. I can't remember the exact specifics, but it was looking specifically at small intakes of animal protein, meat and processed meats, and that's how they divide the groups. And the findings of that study were that even at very, very low levels of animal meat intake, animal protein intake, there was an increase in overall mortality and morbidity. So it seems from the best evidence we have, it does. We can't say 100% for sure that 100% vegan diet, but the general trend is that the more plant-based you go, the better. And that even at very small amounts of animal protein intake, there is a significant increase in disease. So from the majority of the good studies, probably 100% plant-based looks like the way to go, but we're not 100% sure.
Yeah, but the conclusion is just try to decrease the amount of meat that you're intaking, right? If you're eating like I used to eat before I went vegan, with meat multiple times a day, huge barbecues on the weekend, just like a ton of meat, then you have to question these things, right? Because our health is important. Without our health, we don't have anything else. We can't really care for our family optimally. We can't really take our career to the next level if we're feeling bad and unenergetic and lethargic. We need to take care of ourselves. And whether or not you believe that 100% vegan diet is optimal for you, you should at least consider dropping your meat intake and animal product intake drastically to optimize your health and for longevity purposes. So whether you go vegan or not is completely up to you. Do your research, do what you feel is right for you. But we obviously feel very confident in what we're doing. We feel good. We've had no negative experiences yet. Who knows what's going to happen? We might run into some deficiencies very soon. We'll see. But I'm very confident, and all the people that we surround ourselves with, and all the scientific people that I check in with, they all seem very optimistic. So I don't see a reason to be scared of going 100% vegan. But if you feel a little bit scared, go 95% vegan. Have a little piece of something once in a while. Rather than going 100%, if that is the way that you feel you'll be able to sustain it the most. So yeah, do whatever feels best for you. Do whatever works best. Take it gradually. This is not a sprint, it's a marathon. We're trying to live a long life, and we're going to have a lot of learning and hiccups and missteps along the way. So don't be too hard on yourself. It's okay to fail once in a while. Stay positive, and yeah, let me know if you have any other topics, suggestion for the podcast. Let me know what you want to see from Leo next. Let me know how you found this episode. Subscribe to Leo on his YouTube channel. It's called Leo Venus, and his Instagram as well, Leo Venus.
Might be changing soon though.
Oh really? What's it gonna be?
I mean, you have
Dr. Venus.
Maybe, yeah. I was saying you have to use the MD somewhere in there, right?
Yeah, Leo Venus MD. Yeah, that sounds good. Okay. Anyways, that was a good chat. Thank you so much for joining us, Leo.
Thanks
it was a
so much
pleasure
for having
as
me.
always.
Yeah, for sure. I'm looking forward to the next one.
All right, guys. Peace out.